In this video, you will get lessons from this #1 bestseller book. I'm offering this lesson to you for free as part of my company's mission to help you reach your music dreams and have fun along the way. You will find the playlist with all videos from this course in the video description and comments. There may be information in previous videos that will make the video you are watching now easier to understand. I recommend watching the videos in order. Hi, I'm Dan Spencer, author of the Best Music Theory book for beginners. Over 5,000 people have purchased this book, pushing it to hit #1 bestseller in its category on Amazon. Finally, if you would like to get this #1 book, the workbook, for free, along with quizzes, interactive flashcards, and more bonuses, links are in the video description and in the comments. And now, here is the next lesson and the Best Music Theory course, Level 1. Welcome to Pitch and Notes 4, where we are going to talk about simple intervals for the entire chapter, and you are going to get so much awesome value out of this chapter and learn so many cool things, and I'm so excited for you. So an interval is a distance between two pitches or two notes. We're going to think of an interval as being the distance between two notes. A simple interval does not mean that the interval is easy to understand, but a simple interval is quite simply just an interval that is at the most 1 octave. So it's an octave or it's smaller than an octave. That's all that simple means. It means it's not larger than an octave. Quick reminder to listen to all your examples from the Best Music Theory book for beginners 1, How to Read, Write, and Understand Music as we go along. There are two main types of intervals. There's melodic intervals and harmonic intervals. With melodic intervals, we can have ascending and descending intervals. This is just like the major scales and also the chromatic scales, where we had ascending scales and descending scales. An ascending melodic interval means that the second note is higher than the first note. In a descending melodic interval, the second note is lower than the first note, as we can see here. Yep, that's an octave, C4 to C5. Sure enough, that's an ascending interval. So we're talking about the relationship of the first note to the second note. We're saying, okay, between note 1 and note 2 is higher. That's an ascending melodic interval. Here's a descending melodic interval. We're going from C5 to C4, and sure enough, C5 is higher than C4, and that's a descending melodic interval because the second note is lower. We're calling these melodic intervals because they play one at a time, just like a melody, one after the next. The next type of interval to talk about is a harmonic interval. Now, harmonic intervals are when notes don't happen one after the next, but they happen together at the same time. Hear that? 2 notes at the same time? 2 notes at the same time. So here's melodic, here's harmonic. So harmonic intervals, you can see that they're actually written with the note heads directly above each other. And that's harmonic intervals, directly above each other. Look at all those note heads, just stacked on top of each other. And when we see those note heads together at the same time, they sound together, 2 notes at the same time. In summary, in this lesson, you learned about simple intervals. Simple intervals are any interval that is an octave or smaller. And you learned about the two main types of intervals, which are melodic, which means 1 note at a time, and harmonic intervals, which means 2 notes together at the same time. And you learned that in melodic intervals, you can have ascending intervals, where from the first note to the second note is higher, and descending intervals, where from the first note to the second note is lower. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about major and minor intervals. Now, until now, you've used the terms major and minor to describe the quality of either a scale or a pentachord. So we had the major scales, we had the natural minor scales, we had the major pentachord, which is the first 5 notes of the C major or a G major scale, and we had the minor pentachord, which was the first 5 notes of an A or an E natural minor scale. We're going to use the terms major and minor to mean slightly different things when we talk about intervals. So before major and minor, major really just meant it sounded happy and it was like the major scale, and minor meant it sounded sad and thoughtful and it was kind of like the natural minor scale. What we're going to use the term major and minor for here is that major intervals are going to be intervals that are the same as notes from the major scale. So that connection stays good. They're not always going to sound happy like the major scale, but major intervals are connected to the major scale. In the same way that when we talked about natural minor scale degrees and we had the flat 3 and the flat 6 and the flat 7 because they were 1/2 step lower when compared to the whole and the half steps from the major scale, we're also going to call intervals minor because they are 1/2 step lower than they would be if they were from the major scale. And we'll have some examples in the next lesson. So let's review. Minor intervals, in the same way that a natural minor scale has scale degrees flat 6, flat 3, and flat 7, minor intervals mean that we were lowering a note by 1/2 step from where it would be in the major scale. And the term major means that the interval or the notes remain unchanged, or rather the same, from the major scale, and they are not lowered by 1/2 step. Remember, we always like comparing everything to the major scale in music theory. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn about interval quality. The word quality means terms like major or minor. So whenever you hear a major interval, the quality of the interval is major. Whenever you see a minor interval, the quality of the interval is minor. When you talk about a major pentachord, the quality of the pentachord is major. When you talk about a minor pentachord, the quality of the pentachord is minor. When you talk about a major scale, the quality of the scale is major. When you talk about a natural minor scale, the quality of the scale is minor. So let's start by looking at the quality of major intervals. So major intervals are going to be taken from the major scale. We abbreviate major to just be a capital M. So you can see here that C to D, we say M2. That's for a major second. So whenever you see M2, you'll say major second. When you see M3, you'll say major third. When you see M6, you'll say major sixth. When you see M7, you'll say major seventh. So from C to D, you can think about it this way. C would be scale degree 1. D would be scale degree 2. From 1 to 2, that's a major second. C would be scale degree 1. E would be scale degree 3. From C to E is a major third. From C to A is a major sixth because A would be scale degree 6. And from C to B is a major seventh because B would be scale degree 7. Now let's talk about some minor intervals. So the quality of interval we're talking about now is minor. We show that the quality of the interval is minor by having a lowercase m. So C to D flat would be minor second, C to E flat would be minor third, C to A flat would be minor sixth, and C to B flat would be minor seventh. So let's compare these minor intervals with their major counterparts. So C to D is a major second. When we bring D down by 1/2 step, we add a flat to it. It becomes a minor second. So C to D is a major second. C to D flat, that's 1/2 step lower, that's 1/2 step less, that's a minor second. C to E, that's a major second. C to E flat, the flat is bringing the E down by 1/2 step. That means it's going to be a minor third instead of a major third. from C to A is a major sixth. Whereas C to A flat, we're bringing the A down by 1/2 step. So it is a minor sixth. And C to B is a major seventh. But C to B flat, we're bringing the B down by 1/2 step. So we're going to call that a minor seventh. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about a new quality that you've not heard before, and that is the quality of perfect. So these intervals are perfect intervals. The quality of these intervals is perfect. So we abbreviate perfect with a P. So whenever we see a P, we'll say perfect. So here, this is a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and perfect eighth, or rather a perfect octave. We could also have perfect unisons, and we'll unpack that in a second. So you may have noticed that when we talked about major and minor intervals, we only talked about seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths. Well, indeed, what about fourths and fifths and octaves? Because those are all part of the major scale too. We can't leave those out, and we need to use those somehow. We need a name for those, and that name is going to be perfect, and we'll understand why these have a different name in a later lesson. For now, what you need to understand is that when you're looking at a major scale, the fourth or scale degree 4 of that major scale, if you compare it to 1, so if you do an interval of C to F, the quality of that interval is perfect, and it's a perfect fourth. The interval of C to G is a perfect fifth. And the interval of C to C, 1 octave higher or lower, is going to be a perfect octave. Let's talk about unison. A unison interval is when you have two of the same exact notes in a row. And when I say the same exact notes, I mean the same pitch class and the same octave register. So you can see here there's a C4 next to a C4. Because that C does not go up or down, it's the same exact note, it's the same pitch, it's the same sound. We'd have C4 to C4. We're going to call that a unison. Now, unisons are not ascending or descending. They just are unison. And the reason why they're not ascending or descending is because you see they don't go up or down. They stay flat. So you can have melodic unisons, like are written right here. You can also have harmonic unisons, which we'll see in a bit, but I'll give you a little preview here. Harmonic unison looks like this. It's two C's touching each other like that. Kind of crazy, huh? That's a harmonic unison. That's where you would play two C's at the same time if you had an instrument that could play two notes at the same time, which not all instruments can. In summary, in this lesson, you learned about perfect intervals, and the quality of these intervals is perfect, and that's a new quality that you have not seen before, but you just learned about now. Unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves are all perfect when they come from the major scale. Unison notes are two notes that are exactly the same. They are the same pitch class and the same octave register. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn about two more qualities, but those are the last qualities of intervals, and that is the quality of augmented, which is abbreviated with an A, a capital A, and the quality of diminished, which is abbreviated with a lowercase d. So these are two new qualities, the quality of augmented and the quality of diminished. The reason why you would have an augmented or a diminished interval is because you have two notes that are 3 whole steps away from each other. So instead of going whole, whole, half, you're going to go whole, whole, whole. So for example, in the major scale, when we look at scale degree 4, which is F, to scale degree 7, which is B, and we think about the quality formula, sure enough, we have whole, whole, half, whole, whole, whole. That gets us our 3 wholes. So from F to B is 3 whole steps. Let's just put F on our thumb as 1, F, G, A, B. So that's 4. That's why we're going to call it a fourth. That's an augmented fourth. It's augmented because there's 3 whole steps, whereas in the major scale, to get to scale degree 4, normally we go whole, whole, half. But instead of going whole, whole, half, we have 1 extra half step, whole, whole, whole. And because we're going 1 extra half step further than we normally would in the major scale, we're going to call it augmented. And interestingly enough, you can actually flip that around. And B to F is also 3 whole steps. But we're going to give it a different name. We're going to call it a diminished fifth. And here's why. From B to F is a diminished fifth. And it's a diminished fifth because of this. If you think about B, C, D, E, F, there's 5 there. And it's diminished because normally, to get to the fifth, we go whole, whole, half, whole. Whole, whole, half, whole. Whereas, to get a diminished fifth, we're just going whole, whole, whole. We're missing 1 half step. And because we're missing 1 half step, it's 1 half step lower than we would normally find a fifth in the major scale. We call it a diminished fifth. Let's compare these one time with the major scale. So we can see that from C to F is going to be whole, whole, half. We can see that from C to F is whole, whole, half. Whereas F to B is whole, whole, whole. So we're going up 4, just like we went up 4, C, D, E, F in the major scale, but we're going up 4 starting on F, F, G, A, B. But because we have that extra half step in there, that's why we're calling it augmented. Now let's go back to the major scale. In the major scale, when we go from C to G, we go whole, whole, half, whole. So we have 3 whole steps and 1 half step. When we look at, for example, B to F, we have whole, whole, whole. We have B to C sharp to D sharp or E flat, then D sharp or E flat to F, and that is 3 whole steps. So because there's only 3 whole steps there instead of 3 whole steps plus a half step, that's why we're going to call it diminished, because that fifth, that 5, is not going quite as far as it did for the major scale. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to do a deep dive into interval quality, understand a little bit more about the history and why we have all these different qualities and all these different names for the qualities of intervals, as well as review which types of intervals can get which qualities. So, major intervals. The abbreviation for major is going to be a capital M. Whenever you see the capital M for an interval, you know it's a major interval. Seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can all be major. Minor intervals. The abbreviation for minor is a lowercase m, and seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can all be minor intervals. Perfect intervals. That's going to be a capital P. P means perfect. Unisons, that's when 2 notes are exactly the same pitch class, same octave. Fourths, fifths, and octaves can be perfect. Augmented intervals, fourths can also be augmented, just like seconds can both be major and minor, and thirds can both be major and minor. Fourths can be perfect and augmented, and fifths can also be diminished as well as perfect. To understand where these names come from, we need to take a step back in history and talk about traditional consonants and dissonants. So in the same way that a melody can be pleasing to you, but not to someone else, what makes intervals consonant, which means pleasing, or dissonant, which means not pleasing essentially, can be different for different people. In modern music, like video game music, like pop music, a lot of times the terms consonants and dissonants are different from what you are about to learn, but the foundation of this is what all our modern music is built on. This information, this idea of consonants and dissonance is a traditional European way of thinking about it. And I say European because this was invented hundreds and hundreds of years ago, going back to a very old style of composition called counterpoint, which you will learn about more in later courses and books. So we're going to call this older way of thinking traditional consonance and dissonance, and we're going to learn about it because it's going to help you understand what's going on in modern music, even though modern music is not going to be so delicate and so gentle around the dissonance as traditional music was. So for example, the interval of a augmented fourth or a diminished fifth, or was considered to be so dissonant that for a while back in history, it was actually outlawed to be played in a church. So you could not, what I just played, you could not play that in a church because it was felt to be so dissonant that there was no way God had anything to do with that interval. Isn't that wild? So that's a little piece of history to understand how important these ideas of consonance and dissonance have been throughout history, that one of the most distant intervals, the augmented fourth or the diminished fifth, is so dissonant that when people heard it before they understood music theory, there was like, oh, there is no way that has anything to do with all the nice things we want to do in church. There's these ideas of traditional consonance and traditional dissonance that have had huge implications throughout history in shaping how music sounds and ultimately even how the music we listen to today sounds, with things like even the augmented fourth and the diminished fifth being outlawed from being played in churches during certain periods of history. So let's talk a little bit more about consonance and dissonance and what that means. So a consonant interval is a pleasing and harmonious interval without too much friction or fight. A consonant interval is stable and does not have tensions that may want to lead it to somewhere else. So just like we had the leading tone in the major scale that wanted to lead us to the tonic, consonant intervals, they don't act like the leading tone. They don't want to lead us to resolve somewhere else. They don't want us to take the next step. Dissonant intervals, on the other hand, are unsettling and they are full of friction and they sound like they're fighting. A dissonant interval is unstable and it wants to release all the tension in it by resolving to a more consonant interval. So let's listen to some dissonant intervals. Here's one. That right there, that's a minor second. Okay, how about this one right here? That's an augmented fourth. How about this one right here? Oh, that's a diminished fifth. How about this one right here? Oh, that's a major seventh. All right, how about this one right here? This is a major second. Not quite as dissonant as a minor second. Here's a minor second. It's just really, really dissonant. It really has a lot of fight in it. Now here's some consonant intervals. Here's a perfect fourth. Almost sounds like hollow. Here's a perfect fifth. Very stable. Almost sounds like two pillars you could build a city on. Here's a perfect octave. Again, very stable. Major third. Minor third. So a little dissonance there, but not nearly as much dissonance as a minor second. Here's the minor third. It's almost pretty compared to the dissonance of the minor second. And then we have a major sixth, which is more consonant, and also a minor sixth, which is also consonant. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn about interval direction. Now, some of this we've already covered. This is going to be a little bit of a review, but now you're going to understand why we call it interval direction. So you already know about melodic and harmonic intervals. Now, melodic intervals obviously are going to be one note at a time, just like a melody. Harmonic intervals are two notes at a time. We can see that the interval direction of a melodic interval where we have a low note and the second note is higher, that's an ascending interval. And the direction of an interval where the first note is higher, the second note is lower, that's a descending interval. And when you have two notes together at the same time, well, that's not really going in a direction, but we're going to call it a direction, and that's going to be harmonic interval. And then we have unison. So when we have unison intervals, these are not ascending or descending, they're just unison. So we can have harmonic unisons. You see harmonic unison, we just write the notes next to each other. It looks like two eyes like this peeping up at you. However, that right there is how you write a harmonic unison. And then a melodic unison, you just write some space between the notes. And melodic unisons do not get a label of ascending or descending. So within our interval directions, we have three abbreviations that we're going to use to describe our interval directions. So for ascending intervals, we're going to write the abbreviation of ASC for ascending. For descending intervals, we're going to write DSC for descending. And for harmonic, we're going to write HRM. So harmonic is HRM, ascending is ASC, and descending is DSC. We don't call unison ascending or descending, they're just unison. They're either harmonic or they're just plain old unison. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn about interval distance. Interval distance is super important because this is how we can tell the difference of which enharmonic equivalent to use. Remember those enharmonic equivalents, that's one pitch with two different note names. So one sound like this, we could call this a F sharp, or we could call this a G flat. Either would be a correct name for the same sound. It's like using the words two, two, and two, spelled T-O, T-W-O, and T-O-O. They're spelled differently, but they all have the same sound. So interval distance is how we can tell which is the correct enharmonic equivalent to use. So when we think of the first type of interval distance that we are going to understand are ascending intervals. Thinking from low to high has been the easiest thing for us to do from scales so far, and now into intervals. We're going to think from low to high because that's always the easiest thing to do. Counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is way easier than 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Likewise, A, B, C, D, E, F, G is a lot easier than G, F, E, D, C, B, A. If I even did that right, you get the idea. So when we think about interval distance, we're always trying to find some kind of interval. Just like when we were writing the major scale, we knew we needed some kind of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. We just didn't know if the F was sharp or not for like the G major scale, and then we had to count the whole in half steps. It's the same thing here. First, we want to figure out some kind of interval, and as a second step, we'll figure out whether they're sharps or flats, any accidentals needed, or if anything needs to change. So the first thing to do is, without calculating sharps or flats or scale degrees, we're just going to count up or down the basic musical alphabet, counting the note you start on as 1. These numbers are not scale degrees. Remember, scale degrees have a little house over them, and I told you when we were learning scale degrees that we're going to use numbers for a lot of other things, and that's why we need to put the little carré or the little roof over those numbers. Here's one reason why. So let's calculate the interval distance. So for example, C up to F, we're going to count around the basic musical alphabet, and we are going to go, okay, C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4. So that's some kind of fourth. C to F is some kind of fourth. So our next one, C up to A is some kind of okay. We'll see C1, D2, E3, F4, G5, A6. C to A is some kind of sixth. We're going to do 2 more. Okay, G to A is some kind of, all right, G is 1, A is 2, that's some kind of second. And G up to C, G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, that's some kind of fourth. So this is how we think of ascending intervals when we're finding some kind of second, some kind of third, some kind of fourth. What we're doing is we're counting up. So saying C is 1, F is C, D, E, F. 4, so it's some kind of fourth. The distance from C to F is some kind of fourth. Then in number 2, we're counting C to A. We're saying C is 1, A is 6. C, D, E, F, G, A, that's 6. So from C to A is some kind of sixth. From G to A, G is 1, A is 2. 1, 2, that's some kind of second. From G up to C, G, A, B, C, that's 4, that's some kind of fourth. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about figuring out the distance of descending intervals. So to figure out the distance of descending intervals, that's from the highest note to a lower note, melodic, we're going to count backwards down the basic musical alphabet to get our some kind of distance. So let's look. C down to F. Okay. C is 1, B is 2, because we're going backwards now. A is 3, G is 4, F is 5. So C down to F is some kind of fifth, which is interesting because if you recall, in our last lesson we did C up to F, and going to the right around the basic musical alphabet, we got to a fourth. So C going down to F is a fifth, C going up to F is a fourth. Now let's do number 2. Number 2 is C down to A is some kind of what? Okay, so C is 1. We're going backwards now. B is 2, A is 3. Ooh, interesting. So C down to A is some kind of third. Whereas C going up to A, C, D, E, F, G, A was some kind of sixth. G down to A. Let's calculate that one out. We're doing number 3 now. So that's going to be G, F, E, D, C, B. Whoa! A, that gets us to 7. So G to A is some kind of descending seventh. And G down to C. Let's calculate that out. So we're going to start on G and we're going to count backwards. G, F, E, D, C is some kind of fifth. So whenever we're figuring out descending intervals, we're going to count backwards down the basic musical alphabet. So we're going to count down to the left. And that's going to change the number. Like we saw, ascending, G to C was some kind of fourth, but descending, G going down to C is some kind of fifth. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to figure out the some kind of interval for harmonic intervals. So to figure out the some kind of interval for harmonic intervals, you're going to make it easy on yourself. You're going to think about harmonic intervals the same way you thought about ascending intervals. You're going to think about the lowest note to the highest note, and then calculate your some kind of from there. So for example, G to D, harmonic interval, is some kind of second because C is 1 and D is 2. So C up to G, harmonic, is some kind of, okay, C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, some kind of fifth. C up to B. This is going to be a fun one. It's going to be C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, B is 7. So it's some kind of seventh harmonic. From G to B, again, we're just going to think about this as if it's ascending. G is 1, A is 2, B is 3. There you go, some kind of third. And G to E, G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, D is 5, E is 6, is some kind of sixth. So whenever you're trying to identify or talk about an interval, the steps you've learned so far is first to look at the direction of the interval. Is it ascending or descending or harmonic, or is it a unison? Once you know the direction of the interval, if it's ascending or harmonic, then you do some kind of interval to figure out the distance from the lowest note to the highest note. Then, if the interval is descending, you'll think about figuring out your some kind of interval from the highest note backwards down the basic musical alphabet to the lowest note. Once you have those two pieces of information, you know the direction of the interval and you know your some kind of distance of the interval, you are ready for the final step to put the whole thing together and to add in the interval quality to calculate the exact interval. I will see you in the next lesson where we will do some of that. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the two different interval worlds. Now, ultimately, you're only ever going to, in the long run, think about intervals in relationship to the major scale. But for now, we're actually going to think of intervals in two different ways in two different worlds. And you will see both these worlds in your music theory workbook. You're going to see first the easy world where it's just working within the major scale, and then you'll have a challenge page at the end of the harmonic, the ascending, and the descending interval pages where you're actually going to work through it and count half steps and things like that. So in the next lesson, I'm going to break down for you how to count the half steps and how to do that more advanced way of thinking about intervals. So let's start off by breaking down how to know which way of thinking about intervals you need. So step number one, you're going to see is the lowest note of the interval, scale degree 1 of a major scale you know. And these are for harmonic and ascending intervals. So if the answer is yes, then the next question is the highest note in the interval a scale degree from the major scale as the lowest note? So let's say the lowest note is C, the highest note is G. Well, those are both in a C major scale. Great. So the answer is yes. So you're going to think about the lowest note as the tonic of the major scale you're going to use to think. You're going to think of the lowest note as scale degree 1. You're going to count up the major scale from the lowest note, so C, D, E, F, G. Counting scale degree numbers, that's 5. Remember scale degree numbers, so that's 5 of the highest note in the interval. And then you're going to write down the direction of the interval, if it's ascending, harmonic, or unison. And then the quality is either going to be unison, major, or perfect. And the reason we know this is that's just the way the interval math works out. Whenever you are working with ascending or harmonic intervals and both notes are from a major scale you know. So if the bottom note is C or G and the top note is also from a C major scale, or if the bottom note is G from a G major scale, the way the interval math works quite simply is that interval, the quality is either going to be major or perfect. You will never find a minor, augmented, or diminished interval if the lowest note is from a major scale you know and the highest note is from that major scale as well. You will only have major or perfect intervals, and if it's the same note, then it's unison. Now, what happens if the lowest note in the interval is not scale degree 1 of a scale you know? So what if the lowest note of the interval is an F? Or how about a G? Or how about an F? Or how about an E? You know an E natural minor scale, you don't know an E major scale just yet. So the answer to that is no. So your next step is to use the basic musical alphabet to get your some kind of interval. Now for ascending and harmonic intervals, you're going to count that up as some kind of, let's say the bottom note is E, the top note is A. So it's going to be E, F, G, A. It's some kind of fourth. And then what kind of qualities of fourth can we have? We know we can have either perfect or augmented. So then you need to count the half steps between E and A and then compare that to page 106 in your best music theory book for beginners book on the table. And we're going to do that all in the next lesson. I'm going to break that down for you. How to go and compare the interval you're trying to figure out against the table on page 106 for harmonic ascending and descending intervals. In summary, there are two main ways you can think about intervals. Number one is if the lowest note of the interval for ascending and harmonic intervals is scale degree 1 of a major scale that you know. When that happens, then you just walk down this path going, okay, yes or no. And then is the highest note of the interval a scale degree from the major scale as the lowest note? So if the lowest note is C and the highest note is F sharp, well, F sharp's not from C major, it's from G major, so in that case you'd say no, and then you use a basic musical alphabet, you count the sum kind of, so C, D, E, F, and then you'd count the half steps to actually determine the quality of the interval. I will see you in the next lesson where we are going to break down how to do this same sort of thought process with descending intervals. So just like we thought about these two different ways of understanding intervals, a very simple way and a way that, well, it's a little bit more complicated. For ascending and harmonic intervals, we also have a way of doing this with descending intervals. So for descending intervals, the first question to ask yourself is, okay, is the highest note of the interval scale degree 1 of a major scale you know? So if the top note is a C or if the top note is a G, then you answer yes, and we go over here. And then is the lowest note in the interval a scale degree from the major scale as the highest note? So if the top note is C and the bottom note is F sharp, well, F sharp's not from C, it's from G. That means you're going to say no. But for now, let's say that the top note is C and the bottom note is E. Those are both notes from the C major scale. So you're going to think of the highest note in the interval is 1. Then you're going to count backwards down the basic musical alphabet to get your some kind of interval. So from C to E, we go C, B, A, G, F, E. Some kind of sixth. And then for descending intervals, the quality is either going to be minor or perfect. Now, sixths cannot be perfect, and they're also not unison. So sixths are going to be minor, and that's just the way the interval math works out. When the highest note is the tonic of a major scale that you know, and the lowest note is also a scale degree from that scale, then automatically the only possible qualities of interval are going to be minor or perfect. Now let's talk about what happens if the lowest note is not from the same major scale, or if the highest note is not scale degree 1 of a major scale that you know. You're going to follow the steps of figuring out the some kind of interval. So let's say the top note is B and the bottom note is F. So we're going to count backwards down the basic musical alphabet. So B, A, G, F. That's some kind of fourth. Then you need to think, okay, what qualities could be used for a fourth? Well, that would be perfect or augmented. So now you need to figure out and see, is this a perfect or augmented fourth? And you do that by counting the half steps. So B down to B flat or A sharp, that's 1. Down to A, that's 2. Down to A flat or G sharp, that's 3. Down to G, that's 4. Down to F sharp or G flat, that's 5. Down to F, that's 6. And I just happen to know that 6 half steps, that's equal to 3 whole steps, which means it's going to be an augmented fourth, a descending augmented fourth. So it's a little complicated, but just follow the steps every single time, and that's going to get you the correct answers. In the next 3 videos, I'm going to break down and give you examples of harmonic, ascending, and descending intervals where I go through this process and walk you through it. I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to put the whole thing together. We're going to talk about interval direction, interval distance, and then interval quality. So after you know the sum kind of for the interval you're trying to read, write, or understand, you're going to count the half steps of the interval between the 2 notes of the interval and compare them to the chart on page 106 to figure out or confirm the quality of the interval. For example, do you know if the some kind of interval is a major second or a minor second, a major third or a minor third? You need to count the half steps, and that's how you will know. Now, I do recommend memorizing the number of half steps for a minor second, which is 1, a major second, which is 2, a minor third, which is 3, and a major third, which is 4 half steps. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hop over into the workbook, and I'm going to walk you through these 3 steps so you can do this on your own. So I'm in the workbook on the page titled More Harmonic Intervals. So in more harmonic intervals, we're no longer going to be doing the easy intervals you've been doing up until now, which is just thinking about the major scale and if the interval is either major or perfect and not even worrying about minor or diminished or augmented. Once we step outside of easy interval land, the intervals could be major, minor, augmented, diminished, perfect, or even unison. So this is what we're going to do. Let's look at this first interval here. Okay, so already the direction is pretty obvious. The direction is harmonic, and we know it's harmonic because the 2 note heads are right on top of each other, and it's not 2 separate notes. So I'm going to put HRM. Next, let's get our some kind of interval. The lowest note is F, the highest note is B. So let's put F on our thumb. Let's go F, G, A, B. So it's some kind of fourth. So now the only question left is the fourth augmented or is the fourth perfect? Because as we know, fourths can either be perfect or augmented. So what we need to do now is we need to count the half steps between F and B and then compare those to page 106 in the theory book to double check and see what the actual quality is going to be here. You do not need to memorize all of the half steps that it takes to get all the qualities of all the intervals. Just memorize the half steps to get yourself to major third, which is 4 half steps. And then leave it there. So you're going to actually want to use page 106 as a reference a lot for figuring out the actual quality of the interval. Okay, so we know this is some kind of fourth. So from F to F sharp or G flat, that's 1 half step. From F sharp or G flat to G, that's another half step. From G to G sharp or A flat, that's another half step. From G sharp or A flat to A, that's another half step. That's 4 half steps so far. From A to A sharp or B flat, that's another half step. Now, from A sharp or B flat to B, that's another half step. So now we have from F to B, that is a distance of 6 half steps. So let's hop back in to the music theory book and check what 6 half steps would be for our quality. So we go to the ascending and harmonic intervals table here, and we look at number of half steps. That's right in the middle. See that? Number of half steps. And we're going to go to 6. We had 6 half steps. 6 half steps is either going to be an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. Now we know in this case because we went some kind of fourth, so we know it's an augmented fourth, not a diminished fifth. So let's go back to our workbook. And in our workbook, we're going to write augmented fourth. There you go. That's how you figure it out. I will see you in the next lesson where we're going to do some more examples of how to figure out intervals that are not in a major scale that you know. I'll see you then. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to figure out any ascending interval starting from any note. So let's look at our interval that we have here. So we have an A and a D. So first things first, let's take the easy win. We know it's ascending, so let's write that down. Okay, so now let's put A on our thumb. Let's get our some kind of interval. So A, B, C, D. All right, it's some kind of fourth. Now what we need to do is to figure out the quality of the fourth. We know fourths can either be perfect or augmented. So now we just need to count the half steps to know whether it's perfect or augmented. So we have A to A sharp or B flat. That's 1. A sharp or B flat to B. That's 2. To C, that's 3. C sharp or D flat, that's 4. To D, that's 5. Now I happen to know already that's going to be a perfect fourth, but let's take a look. And indeed, 5 half steps is going to be highlighted in green, an ascending perfect fourth. 5 half steps. All right, let's do one more ascending interval. So we're going to finish up our last one, P4, perfect fourth. Okay, ascending perfect fourth, great. Now this next interval, we have an F and an A. Let's take the easy win and write down the direction first. That's ascending. So now let's figure out the some kind of interval. So it's F, G, A. That's some kind of third. Remember, we're counting up the basic musical alphabet. F, G, A. Now we need to figure out how many half steps there are between F and A so we can correctly determine the quality of the interval. F to F sharp or G flat, that is 1 half step. F sharp or G flat to G, that is 2 half steps. G to G sharp or A flat, that is 3 half steps. And G sharp or A flat to A, that is 4 half steps. So we know it's some kind of third, and we have 4 half steps. Now I happen to know already that 4 half steps, because I've memorized up to a major third, is indeed going to be a major third for the quality. But let's go ahead and look at page 106 so you can see the difference between the minor third and the major third. And sure enough, you can see that a major third is 4 half steps highlighted in yellow. And had it been 3 half steps, for example, F to A flat, that would have been the ascending minor third. Let's do one more, shall we? Okay, we are going to do one more. Let's do this one right here. So let's take the easy win and let's write down the direction first, ascending. Next, let's do our some kind of interval. So we have an E is our lowest note and a D is our highest note. So we're going to go E, F, G, A, B, C, D. So it's some kind of seventh. Now here's the doozy. We've got to count the half steps from E to D to see what the quality of the seventh will be. And we know that the quality of a seventh could either be a major seventh or a minor seventh for the quality. So from E to F is 1/2 step. From F to F sharp or G flat is 1/2 step. From F sharp or G flat to G is 1/2 step. From G to G sharp or A flat is 1/2 step. From G sharp or A flat to A is 1/2 step. From A to A sharp or B flat is 1/2 step. From A sharp or B flat to B is 1/2 step. Well, I need more fingers. From B to C is 1/2 step. From C to C sharp or D flat is 1/2 step. From C sharp or D flat to D is 1/2 step, and we have 10 half steps there. Now I happen to know that this is going to be a minor seventh, but let's go take a look at page 106. And sure enough, you can see here ascending minor seventh is 10 half steps with a highlight in blue. There it is. Ascending minor seventh is 10 half steps. So whenever the lowest note of an interval to the left for ascending intervals is not scale degree 1 of a scale you know, and the top note is also from that same scale, then you know the quality is going to be major or perfect. But what's going to be more likely than not is that the lowest note in the interval is not going to be from a scale that you know, or even if it is, that the top note may not be from the same major scale, which means you then need to go and do exactly what we did in this video and do your some kind of interval first, and then count your half steps, and then compare it to this table on page 106 to get the correct quality of the interval. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to break down 2 descending intervals that are not from major scales that you know and do not have lower notes that are also from major scales that you know. So when you do this, you're going to need to do your some kind of interval process, counting backwards, and then count your half steps to then know the exact quality of the interval in question. So let's do our first interval. This is from the workbook, and take the easy win and write the direction first. That's the easy part. We can see first note is higher than the second note. It's a descending interval. Great. The next thing to do is to count backwards down the basic musical alphabet to get our some kind of interval. So we go A, back to G, back to F, back to E. So from A down to E is some kind of fourth. Now we need to figure out how many half steps there are. So we know for fourths, it can either be augmented or perfect. So what we're trying to figure out right now is how many half steps there are, and then we're going to compare that to page 106 to see the exact quality of the interval. So we start on A, we go down 1/2 step to A flat or G sharp, we go down another to G, we go down 1/2 step to G flat or F sharp, we go down another half step to F, and we go down one more half step to E. And that's going to be a perfect fourth because it's 5 half steps. And you can see that here for descending intervals, sure enough, descending perfect fourth is 5 half steps. Let's go back and do one more. We're going to take one that's a little bit more challenging this time just because of the ledger lines and there's a larger distance between the notes. So our first note is E, our second note is F, but what you should do first is take the easy win and write the interval direction. Okay, that was easy. So we're going to start on E. E, down to D, down to C, down to B, down to A, down to G, down to F. Okay, so it's some kind of seventh. And we know that sevenths can be major or minor. Those are our 2 possible qualities of seventh. So what we need to figure out now is how many half steps there are between this E and this F so we can know if this is a major seventh or a minor seventh. So let's count down the half steps. From E down to E flat or D sharp is 1. Down to D is 1. Down to D flat or C sharp is 1. Down to C is 1. Down to B is 1. Down to A sharp or B flat is 1. Down to A. Down to A flat or G sharp is another. Down to G. Down to F sharp or G flat is another. And then down to F. So that's 11 half steps. That is so many half steps. That's going to be a major seventh. Let's go back and double check that math on our table, shall we? And sure enough, you can see that 11 half steps is a descending major seventh. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to summarize how to name and write interval names as well. So to name ascending and harmonic intervals, first you need to figure out the interval direction. Is it harmonic or is it ascending? Then you're going to figure out the sum kind of interval using the basic musical alphabet counting up. Next, you need to ask yourself, okay, which qualities could be used for this sum kind of interval? For example, if it's a second, we know seconds can be major or minor. If it's a third, thirds can be major or minor. If it's a fourth, fourths can be perfect or augmented. Fifths can be perfect or diminished. Then figure out how many half steps there are from the lowest note to the highest note in the interval. And then you're going to go back to page 106 and you're going to figure out, okay, how many half steps are there? What really is that interval? And then to name descending intervals, first you figure out the interval direction. You label or say the interval direction. That's the easy part, descending. Then you figure out your sum kind of intervals going backwards down the basic musical alphabet. And then you're going to think, well, which qualities could be used for this type of interval? Then you're going to figure out the half steps from the highest note to the lowest note and compare that with page 106 right up here to see the exact quality of the interval. In summary, you're going to name the direction of the interval, ascending, descending, harmonic. Then you're going to name the quality of the interval, major, minor, perfect, augmented, or diminished. And then you're going to name the distance of the interval, unison, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, or octave. Example of how we would say or write intervals would be C to a higher sounding D flat. We would say an ascending minor second, right ascending minor second. C to a lower sounding B, you would say a descending minor second, right DSC M2. And C and D played together, you would say harmonic major second. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to combine our two ways of thinking about intervals and actually compare some intervals that are easily in that major scale way of thinking about, okay, it's either major or perfect for ascending or harmonic, or it's minor and perfect for descending. And then what if we change just the highest note for ascending or harmonic, or what if we change just the lowest note for descending? And then you can start to make the connection between the major scale and 1/2 step worth of difference. So, for example, let's look at example 1 here. So we have an ascending perfect fourth here, and both notes are from the C major scale. We have C, which is scale degree 1, and F, which is scale degree 4. Now, what if we just changed scale degree 4 and we put a sharp on it? Well, think about it. We're taking a fourth and we're making it larger by 1/2 step, which means it's going to be augmented. So you don't even have to count whole and half steps there. You just sort of use a little bit of logical thinking of, okay, we have a perfect fourth. We make it larger by 1/2 step and it becomes an augmented fourth. We're going to do 3 more examples like this. Okay, well, here's one where, sure enough, our first interval, it starts from a C, so you already start thinking, okay, it starts from a C. That's a major scale that I know. But I'm going to count down, well, C, B, A, G, F, so it's some kind of fifth, right? Now we can see here that that sharp in front of the F, that makes it a diminished fifth, because what happens is we have the fifth, and then we make the bottom note sharp. That makes the distance less. So typically, when we have a C to an F here descending, that's going to be indeed a perfect fifth. But when we raise it up 1/2 step, it becomes a diminished fifth because the distance is less. C to F, that's an easy one. You just put your major scale hat on and go, okay, C, B, A, G, F. Is it minor or is it perfect? Well, it's a fifth. Fifths can't be minor, must be perfect. So when you see intervals that are close to an interval that you know, they're 1/2 step away, you can very easily do a little bit of thinking and actually know the name of the interval that's not from the major scale by comparing it to the interval from the major scale. Like I said in music theory, well, we sure do love to compare things to the major scale. Here's another one. From G to F sharp, well, those are both in the major scale. F sharp scale degree 7, G scale degree 1. Now, what happens when we have an F natural? Well, that's 1/2 step less than an F sharp. So instead of a major seventh, it's a minor seventh because 1/2 step less. That's it. Just by thinking about the major scale and comparing the interval to the major scale, we can know that it's a minor seventh instead of a major seventh. Let's do one more. Okay, so from a G to an F sharp in the major scale, this would be scale degree 1, this would be scale degree 7. So we can put our major scale hat on. Say, okay, we know for descending intervals, they're either minor or perfect when both notes are from a major scale we know, and the first note, the highest note, is scale degree 1 of a major scale we know. But what happens when we bring it down by 1/2 step? Well, we're going to grow from a minor second to a major second because it is 1/2 step larger. Hopefully some of these tips and tricks are going to help you start to make connections when you see intervals where you know one of the notes, you know the highest note for a descending interval, and you know the lowest note for an ascending interval, but you don't know the other note. I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write ascending and descending simple intervals. So you've learned how to identify ascending, descending, and harmonic simple intervals. You've learned how to name them. You've learned how to figure them out. Now you're going to learn how to write ascending and descending. In the next lesson, we will do harmonic. So to write an ascending simple interval, you write a clef, you can write a double bar line, and I find it very helpful to write both the direction, the quality, and the interval distance below the staff. That way you can remind yourself and just look back down at it, and it gives you clarity, it gives you a goal that you're trying to accomplish. Step number 2, if you're writing an ascending interval, well, you're going to think up and to the right, and then you go ahead and complete the interval. For descending intervals, it's exactly the opposite. You're still going to start the same way. Step 1, you're going to write your first note, write your interval direction, the interval quality, and the interval distance. And then you're going to write your second note down to the right. I will see you in the next lesson where we are going to unpack how to write harmonic intervals. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write simple harmonic intervals. So the first thing for us to talk about are the note heads of simple harmonic intervals. And there's a couple interesting things to unpack there. So let's talk about our first 3 rules. Rule number 1 is harmonic intervals are written with notes of the same rhythmic value. That's important. You're not going to write a harmonic interval with a whole note and a half note, or a quarter note and a half note. It's going to be a whole note and a whole note, or a half note and a half note, and a quarter note and a quarter note. For harmonic unisons, you're going to write both note heads on either side of the stem if there are stems. Let's take a look at that. So here's a harmonic unison with whole notes, and here are harmonic unisons with a half note and 2 quarter notes. You can see that a note head goes on either side of the stem. It's pretty funky looking, but there you go. For a harmonic minor second and harmonic major second, you're going to write the lowest note of the interval facing to the left and the highest note facing to the right. Check this out. Here's a harmonic minor second from B to C with the second note up and to the right. And when we have a stem, so we have a C to a D, that's a harmonic major second. And you can see, sure enough, that D is written on the right side of the stem, whereas the C is written on the left side of the stem. And the second half note here, we have an F sharp to a G. That's a harmonic minor second. And you can see that the F sharp, because it's lower than the G, is written to the left. The G is written to the right. And here are 4 examples of harmonic seconds with quarter notes. And you can see in each case, the lowest note is going to the left. The highest note is going to the right. In review, to write simple intervals with note heads, you're only ever going to use notes that are the same rhythmic value as each other. You can see for the harmonic intervals here, if they have stems for half notes and quarter notes, both note heads share a stem. We're going to talk about the stems in the next lesson. For harmonic unisons, you write the note heads on the same line or the same space of the staff, and if it's a quarter note or a half note, you write the note heads on either side of the stem. And then for harmonic major and minor seconds, you write the lower note to the left, the higher note to the right if there's a stem, and if it's a whole note here where there is no stem, well, you basically just write the first note where beat 1 would go, and then you write the second note directly above it. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write harmonic intervals with stems. So that's going to be harmonic intervals with half notes or quarter notes. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that we're going to have a special name for a certain part of the stem. That's going to be the part of the stem that is the furthest away from the note head. We're going to call that the open end of the stem. Now, this term does also work for when we only have 1 note head, or even 3 or 5 or 7 note heads. The part of the stem that is the furthest away from the note heads, we're going to call that the open end of the stem. Open because there are no note heads on it. So let's look at our stem rules and understand how they look in real life. You're going to see that a lot of these rules actually match up with the stem writing rules you already know, and we're just going to add a couple extra little things in there. So rule number 1, you already know this one. Stem length is 4 staff lines long, but here's the thing. It's from the closest note head to the open end of the stem. So let's take a look at that. So as you may remember from when you first learned to write notes with stems, if we have a note head in space 4 of the staff, our stem will be 1, 2, 3, 4 staff lines long, and sure enough, 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Now all we're going to do is we're going to add just a little bit extra so we can get that second note head in there to complete the harmonic interval. We can see the same thing here with a note that is stem up, 1, 2, 3, 4 staff lines long is the stem to our first note head, and then we extend the stem just a little bit to make sure it reaches the note head that is the furthest away from the open end of the stem. Rule number 2, you may recall this one from when you learned how to write notes on ledger lines. And that is, if the note head closest to the open end of the stem is on one ledger line, above or below the staff, we are still going to respect the 4 staff lines long rule for how long the stem should be. So you can see here that our note head that is the closest to the open end of the stem, that's this one right here, is closest to the open end of the stem. We see it is on one ledger line. That means we're just going to think about that note that is closest to the open end of the stem, and we're going to make a stem that is, again, 4 staff lines long. Same thing with stem up. So you can see that even though the note head that is furthest away from the open end of the stem is, well, it's already on a second ledger line. It's showing us an A note, which is pretty far away from the staff. Because this note right here, this note head right here, is below one ledger line, or above one ledger line if you're thinking on it, because this note head right here has not passed one ledger line below the staff, we're still going to respect the 1, 2, 3, 4. You see that? 1, 2, 3, 4 staff lines long rule for the stem. And then we just extend the stem a little bit more to reach the second note, and then with the ledger lines. Now, just like writing notes with ledger lines again, if the note closest to the note head goes past one ledger line, either above or below the staff, that's when we extend the stem to reach all the way to line 3. So we can see here that sure enough, our note head that is closest to the open end of the stem is above the first ledger line above the staff, and so we're going to extend the stem all the way to line 3. Now these are both definitely above the first ledger line of the staff, and so we're extending the stem to line 3. Same thing here and here. For the notes that are stem up, you can see that the note head that is closest to the open end of the stem, the note head that is closest to the open end of the stem is past one ledger line. That means we're connecting the stem to line 3 of the staff. What happens when we have two note heads on the staff that, well, they're not evenly distributed? They're not evenly together. Like, well, you can see that in all examples 1 and 2, all these note heads are all close together. They're all seconds or thirds here. These are all seconds or thirds. What happens when we get to fourths and fifths and sixths and sevenths and even perfect octaves? Well, to know whether you need to write stem up or down, you're going to look at the note head that is the furthest away from line 3. So here's line 3. And we can see that sure enough, this note head right here, well, it's further away from line 3. So that's going to tell us stem down, even though normally if we just have an A note or a note head in line 2, we would have stem up because that's below the staff. But because we have two notes here, we're going to just look at whichever note head is the furthest away from line 3, and that's the one that is going to decide whether it's stem up or stem down. So here you can see that indeed we have a close call here, but this note head, it's one staff line further away from line 3, and because of that, we're going stem down, even though if you were to write a note head in space 1, always you would have a stem up. Because as we know, every note below line 3 of the staff should have stem up. However, this is the exception for that when we have two note heads. Now, if the note head furthest away from line 3 is below the staff, we are automatically going to go stem down. So let's look at this major second here. This is pretty interesting. We have an A note and a B note. Now, as we know, if we have a note head on line 3, we should have a stem down staff. However, because there's two notes here, and the note that is furthest away from line 3 is this guy right here, that's actually going to dictate, because the note that is furthest away from line 3 is below the staff. One more rule for you, and that is if the note heads are an equal distance away from line 3 of the staff, you're just going to automatically do stem down. So you can see here we have a unison B, a harmonic unison B right here. And because, well, both of these notes are on line 3, they are an equal distance away from line 3 total, so it's going to be stem down. Same thing here, we have a note in space and space, an equal distance away from line 3, so we're going to do stem down. Same thing for the next two examples as well. Those are all your stem rules, and I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write harmonic simple intervals using the notehead and the stem rules you learned in the last two lessons. So number one, you're going to write a treble clef, a double bar line, and a starting notehead. Step number two, you're going to count up the number of half or whole steps needed to create your desired interval. Step three, you're going to add the second notehead directly above the first notehead. And then step four, you add the stem following the stem rules. I will see you in the next lesson. Oh, but it's not over yet. Click here to watch the next video lesson or up here for the full video playlist.